Hello, everybody. This is Jose Valdez. Here to do the first module discussion. So I'm just going to start off. In what ways are or were your definitions of organizational communication alike or different from those presented in the text? So it says to share your definition of what you believe the text and what you believe the text definition of organizational communication is. So my definition of organizational communication was very basic. I stuck to the idea of human communication and described organizational communication as the messages sent and received that make the workplace function. I was alike in the fact that communication is messages that are sent and received, but overall it was kind of a bit off base, pretty basic definition. Organizational communication was described as the process by which organizational stakeholders try to influence the mind of another organizational stakeholder or holders through the intentional use of verbal, nonverbal, and mediated messages. So I think it's really important to take the intentional use into consideration because the unintended meaning of something, even though it's communicated, it's not what the person was trying to communicate. And I found that definition on page 34 of section 1.3. So the biggest takeaway from that is the part that involves stakeholders. So when it comes to organizational communication, you have to be invested in the organization for it to be considered organizational communication. So it can be employees, it can be owners, it can be customers, it could be vendors, anything that has to do with organization. So even if a customer is just simply talking about, whether the organization is a good organization or if it sucks, that can be considered organizational communication. So I think the stakeholders or the people or groups with shared interests in the organization, and that is the biggest ambiguity between human and organizational communication. The fact that communication is described as a process is also important. It highlights all the phases of communication that are valid and necessary. Communication isn't simply I said something. That's communication. No, it's saying something intentionally, and then that message being perceived, received, and perceived. So communication is that entire process, and I really thought that was important. That was a takeaway that I really found interesting. So then the next question says, based on your reading and the video shared, do you currently believe organization and communication relate? So, give an example on your own personal experience. So, I think it's pretty obvious that organization and communication are essential to one another. Without communication, I don't think any group, family, team, or organization would exist. Even nonverbal gestures can help groups of people, interact towards a common goal. Like when people used to hunt, I'm sure before language was even considered. Nonverbal cues like hand gestures and stuff probably helped people work together to gather food. Communication must happen in order to sustain an organization. Ultimately, an organization exists to serve a purpose. Communication helps to clarify, interpret, organize, and achieve that purpose. In my line of work, I must coordinate with the customer, vendors, and team members within one job. My organization is small. It's just a small business I started last year. But the work would not exist without communication. I need to make a bid, a quote, so I have to communicate that first off, and then I have to agree with the customer, and then communicate, set an appointment to complete the job. Then I have to communicate with vendors whether they can get me the product I need, whether it needs to be delivered, and then I need to be able to communicate that attention of how the job is going to end up to the people who are working with. The actual labor can't start until I communicate the objectives and the methods of application to my crew. If I don't supervise my crew and communicate my expectations or the specific specifications of what I'm doing, we'll end up spending more time on the job than necessary. And that irks the customer and it makes it so you lose money. So it's crucial to communicate in order to run a business successfully in every facet, whether it's with the customer, the vendor, or team members. It's all important. So then it asks what were the 3 most important concepts presented in the first chapter of our text. Explain the concepts and cite your explanation. So I thought the biggest concepts were 1, many people on page 1 or section 1.1, page 9, it states that many people have attempted to define what is meant by the word organization, which is the way we started off the class. This idea is important because the authors acknowledge that organization is not a simple term or concept. It's not something that we can just define. An organization can be a tangible part of a business, group, or team, which is referred to as a structure. Can be the mission, the goals, like 3 things that they mentioned were structure, goals, and people. And so that has a human aspect as well. So having been provided with so many definitions in the text, the authors concluded there's enough information in all of those definitions to consider all of them. So even though they found that structure, goal, and people were the main themes within an organization, the dozens of definitions that were included in the text partially supported by the authors. So even our definition, I'm sure everyone's definition in the course to some extent were valid because we all have an idea of what organization is, even if we don't know that. So then the second concept was in section 1.2 where the authors state, first and foremost, there is no agreed upon definition of the word communication by various scholars. Kind of the same thing as the first concept. That was on page 26. I think this is an interesting concept that parallels the section on organization. In the same paragraph, the authors also state that the first step in defining the term human communication is to acknowledge that the attempt you are making is one in a voice of many. That was on page 26 as well. There are many suitable definitions to human communication, but the one that authors choose is that human communication is the process whereby one individual or group of individuals attempts to stimulate meaning in the mind of another individual through the intentional use of verbal, nonverbal, and mediated messages. So kind of the same thing as organizational communication, the same exact definition, except instead of it being stakeholders, it's just individuals. So you can be doing probably human communication and organizational communication at the same time, but I don't think you can do just organizational communication if it has nothing to do with an organization. Then it's just human communication. Sounds pretty simple. So I think that biggest point of the process of human communication was to stimulate meaning in the mind of another individual. So you're trying to influence the way they think. You're trying to change their mind, persuade them, or validate them. Either way, communication is there's some sort of meaning behind what you're trying to do, even if it's a hand gesture. If you're saying no, you're trying to convey that you mean no. I think that's important to the chapter because it helps us kind of get an idea of what the whole point of this course is. Organizational communication. There's an intentional reasoning behind when you communicate within an organization. So I think we're going to hopefully learn why do you need to communicate this. We've already learned a little bit, but so the third concept was human communication and organizational communication are essentially the same concept, which is what I already talked about. But I think for me, this was probably the most important part of the assignment or the chapter. So the biggest difference was that human communication involves individuals, while organizational communication involves individuals within the organization. The organization maintains human communication, but ultimately, organizational communication is its own concept. So, organizational communication was described. There was a part of the book that described organizational communication as like a natural phenomenon. It just so happens to occur within an organization, whether you mean it to or not. If you're unhappy about something at work and you talk to another coworker about it, then you're communicating. You're exhibiting organizational communication. And so the authors acknowledge by stating, you'll notice the similarities between this definition and the one we provided earlier for human communication. So stakeholders are the human aspect of organization. They basically replace the individual in human communication definition with stakeholders. So from what I understand, basically they're the same thing. But organizational communication only applies to an organization. So I've hammered that point away. Hopefully it doesn't seem redundant.